If you're a professional brewer, you know how frustrating it can be when you go to place a yeast order and what you're looking for is out of stock. Well, Imperial Yeast is here to help by guaranteeing that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 10, yes, 10 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. Some of these strains include A38 Juice for those hazy IPAs, A07 Flagship, a classic in clean American styles, L13 Global, which is said to be one of the world's most popular lager strains, A44 Kviking for your warm fermented beers, and so many more. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Sour beer has been around for as long as beer has been a thing. In fact, there's a high likelihood most of the earliest versions of beer were fermented with more than just brewer's yeast. While brewers in some regions developed approaches to better control the outcome of their intentionally soured beers, the time it takes for certain souring bacteria to work was a barrier to many, though more recently some methods have been developed to hasten the turnaround time of these unique styles. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and on this episode I'm joined by contributor Ryan Hansen to discuss the kettle souring process, particularly when it involves using the probiotic drink known as Goodbelly.
I've been a fan of the quick sours since they started coming out. I've always been a sour fan in general, but because we can turn these around so fast, I've become a really big fan.
Well, and somebody who brews them more often, I would imagine, right?
I do. I almost always have one on tap, and I've got quite a few of my neighbors that come over and only drink those.
I've got a neighbor like that too. His name's Tim, and he likes to evaluate beer. The thing about quick sours is I feel like it has opened up the world of sour beer to a lot of brewers, home brewers in particular, because it does make the process so much easier. Now, I love sour beer, and while I've made quite a few in my day using various methods, I certainly don't consider myself an expert. You might hear me say that a couple times during this episode. We've talked about it on this show before, but I personally love the whole quick sour movement, if that's what we're going to call it, I guess. Unlike those who complain about the lack of complexity in beers that aren't soured over 15 years or whatever it is,
right.
I rather enjoy the clean character I get from a nice kettle sour beer. And the fact they can be made using something as easy to acquire and not to mention fast working as Goodbelly is pretty rad in my book. I look forward to chatting about this one with you today, Ryan. If you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. The guest for this month, October of 2023, is, well, yours truly, the person behind the mic right now. That's right. There have been a few requests from patrons to have me come back on and kick it with them, answer some questions, and since it's been a couple years since the last time I did it, I thought it might be kind of fun as well. I'm pretty open to answering whatever questions you might have, whether it's about brewing or not. So if there's something you've been dying to know about me, here's your opportunity to ask. My session's going to be held on Saturday, October 28th, 2023. So to be part of it, you have to make your pledge of just $3 or more at patreon.com/Brewlosophy no later than Friday the 27th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. You can learn more about becoming a patron and all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate that as well. We read every single one of those reviews and we get a kick out of some of them as well. In fact, I've been considering doing an episode. Somebody suggested this. In fact, it was a patron suggested that we do an episode where we just go over and read reviews. We would have to pick one because I think Apple Podcast is the most, they have the most reviews there, but just read reviews and respond to them. Who knows? But we do appreciate all of those ratings and reviews. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems. These things are legit, they're efficient, easy to use, and they have a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to let them know Brewlosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Ray Lamora from West Virginia wrote in after listening to our experience episode where you, Ryan, talked about your walk-in cooler build, which we received quite a bit of feedback on, just people who are obviously envious, like I think a lot of us are. Ray said, I was so excited to listen to this episode as I'm in the crazy process of building a walk-in cooler with very little experience with this type of construction. I can build some furniture and minor projects like that, but I've never framed our walls or anything like that. I started brewing about 6 years ago in the typical fashion with extract brews and bottling. I moved to all grain brewing and then was talked into kegging as it is so much easier and less vessels to clean and sanitize. I was able to pick up my first fridge for $50 and poked 2 holes in it for taps, and it worked great, but I was brewing more and I wanted more options on tap. I was offered a used fridge for free that was full size, and I was able to put 4 taps in this one, but again, I had more things I wanted to brew and the 4 taps were not cutting it. About a year later, I read something about the CoolBot and how it works. I did not think it would be an easy sell to the wife, but somehow she bought it as we could get our garage fridge and the kegerator out in lieu of this project. I have an area under our stairs that's roughly 6 foot by 4 foot that I'm expanding to be about 8 foot long. I'm going to do the foam board insulation and build some shelving alongside one, leaving the garage side for taps. Hopefully putting in 6 taps to start and leaving room for 2 more if I continue to grow. Although I did not get a ton of ideas from this show, it made me feel so much better knowing that not only does it seem like I'm on the right track with my plans, but others have jumped into this with little prior experience. Ryan, what say you?
Ray, I cannot wait to see pictures of this thing. That sounds pretty cool, especially since it's under your stairs. I assume those taps are going to be like in your living room or somewhere adjacent to easy access. So knee jerk is one, buyer beware. When you have that easy access, the tendency is to just go and top your glass off every time you walk by. And so it could get a little dangerous like that. It's really not as scary as people think to set these up. Mine has been on constantly for 3 years, and I just now had my first issue with the air conditioner. So my advice is make sure that you let the vents on the sides of the air conditioning unit breathe properly, because I kind of got some spray foam in there, and I think that's what sent it over the edge. So the replacement, I just got the exact same one. It's on its way. I'm just going to slip the old one out and put the new one in. And yeah, we'll be back off to the races. Also, when you get that unit, get like the 3-year warranty. I just got mine on Amazon because they're getting run harder than they are intended to run, but it's worked perfectly for me. So yeah, that's a nice big space too for you. So you'll really enjoy that. It works for all sorts of stuff too. Birthday cakes, watermelons.
Yeah, it's so I was thinking that as well, that you're buying a window, in essence, a window air conditioning unit, and then you are bypassing the regular like cooling max, right? With the CoolBot. So you are running this thing much harder than it's intended to be run. So I could not agree more with just spend the extra 15 or 20 bucks on the replacement plan or whatever it is, and that way you're protected. Because man, that thing, especially where we live, Ryan, we're both in Fresno. It is hot here in the summertime. That thing does not turn off, I imagine.
So the way that it runs is the CoolBot has its own thermostat. So that's what's telling it this is the temperature that I want. So I keep mine at 34.
Yeah.
Even in 115 degrees summer with the right insulation, the fan is always running on the AC unit, but the compressor is only coming on like in the hottest summers. I can hear it click on maybe 15, 20 minutes every couple of hours.
Oh, okay.
And otherwise, so yeah, I didn't see a significant spike in electricity use. They're pretty efficient. And so, yeah, the fan is always on because that's keeping the air circulating, but the compressor itself is being run harder than it would for a room, but not really that much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Ray actually sent this feedback a while ago, so I've been holding off until you were co-hosting, Ryan, to do this. So I do wonder if he's finished this project yet or where he's at with it. Either way, Ray, if you have, or even if you're halfway through, send us some photos. I'd love to see an update on where you're at with it. All right, if you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. If you are not already subscribed to the Brulosophy Show on YouTube, please go do it as soon as possible at at youtube.com/at The Brulosophy Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brulosophy Show with no umlaut. Martin is producing some seriously amazing content over there, and we're certain fans of this show will love that as well. We'll be back talking about kettle souring with Goodbelly right after this break. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I made my first sour beers back in 2012. It was actually a batch. I believe I split it and I pitched 2 different lab cultures in it. Well, back then the common approach, that's what it was. It involved pitching some sort of a lab blend, then letting it work for a year or longer. While I ultimately enjoyed the way those beers turned out, and I've had a ton of traditionally soured beers that were absolutely incredible, I was admittedly stoked when this whole quick souring thing started to gain traction. And over the last few years, I've made a handful myself that I've been really, really happy with. Now, before we start focusing specifically on souring with Goodbelly and probiotics and stuff like that, I thought it'd be good to start with just some generals first. Again, we've done a few episodes on sour beers already, so if any of this feels redundant, please forgive us. First off, what exactly do we mean by sour beer?
Well, a sour beer is anything that has been soured over time, or as we're talking about today, quickly, that gets down to about a 3 pH, a 3.0 pH. That's usually the target range.
You know, I'm going to, so the whole pH thing, I always, when I started making sour beer over 10 years ago, that was a lot of the focus was like, oh man, this thing got down to 2.8 or 2.9 pH. And, you know, the folks over at the absolutely essential and fantastic Milk the Funk, somebody from there commented that really what we should be paying attention to is this thing called titratable acidity. This is one of the areas where I'm going to say that we're going to keep it simple for this episode. This is not a sour beer podcast where we're going to dig into those weeds. So we are going to talk a little bit more just about your basic pH of the beer. There is titratable acidity. If you're really getting into sour beer and stuff, I just want to say that may be what you want to focus on. It's never been anything that I've been terribly concerned with. And paying attention just to the pH of the finished beer has always been pretty effective for me. So yeah, like you said, Ryan, I tend to have a preference for that 2.8 to 3.2 pH range. And that's pretty wide range in terms of pH. But that is where, in my opinion, you're able to say, okay, this beer has that level of acidity where we can call it a sour beer. Typical, your standard beer, a pale ale, a British bitter, something like that, you're typically going to fall in the 4 to 5 pH range. That's the norm for that. So you can see that a sour beer really does have some level of acidity that is noticeably different than a normal beer, hence the reason it's called a sour beer. What's neat, though, is that acidity comes from something. There's something that you do differently with a sour beer to make it sour, to have that tart thing. And one of those things that you can do, this is probably, I'm going to use a word here and I don't mean to offend anybody, but the cheapest way to get that is to just add exogenous acids. So you go to more beer and you pick up some lactic or phosphoric acid. I've heard of people using citric acid for this as well. And you take your finished beer, you add this acid until it gets to the tartness that you're looking for, and voila, you've effectively made a sour beer without having to go through the process of making a sour beer. Is that something you've ever done before, Ryan?
It is. Usually those exogenous acids are what I would use to pre-acidify a little bit. But yeah, I mean, technically you could do that right in the glass.
That was the very first time I ever considered making a sour beer. Somebody suggested I do that. And I've done it a few times. I'll do it in like a taster glass. That's kind of the easy thing about it. You can just do it in a sample, small sample of beer. It does the trick. It makes the beer sour, but it is about as unidimensional as you're going to get. It is pretty boring. Yeah. And if you overdo it, it's like eating a warhead. I mean, it's not malic acid sour, but it gives you that kind of puckering kind of, I don't know. It's like a chemical sour. Maybe your experience is different.
Yeah, you can go overboard pretty quick. This is also one of the ways that folks can get used to what those flavors taste like. Like if you want to learn what lactic acid's actual flavor is without putting some directly in your mouth, which I do not recommend.
Do not recommend
Ask
doing
me
that.
how I know. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, citric acid does the job of dropping pH. Say with hop water, for example, that's one of the things that we can do to get it into that zippy kind of the right mouthfeel for it. You could also use lactic acid, but in my experience, I've found that does have its own unique flavor that we don't always want.
Yeah, that's something that a few past Brewlosophy contributors have commented on, that some lactic acid seems to have kind of a diacetyl-like or buttery type of a note to it. I've been lucky enough to avoid getting lactic acid that has that, or maybe I just don't detect it. But that is one option, is just adding exogenous acids to your beer. Not many people are doing that. You're not going to go to a quality brewery and have a sour beer where they just dropped in a bunch of phosphoric acid into the beer, post fermentation. Another more modern way, and we're kind of moving around here just so that we can focus on our real point in a minute. But another modern way of making, I'm going to put this in air quotes, sour beers, is by using these novel yeast strains that have the ability to reduce beer pH. And I think it's really a fascinating thing. You'll hear things like sour VCA or Philly sour. I don't think that they're going to get, I've had beers soured with both of those, or I should say fermented with both of those. And I do not perceive them as contributing the level of acidity that I expect in a sour beer, in a kind of a common, sour beer. But they are more acidic than a standard, ale fermentation or lager fermentation beer. And I think it's a really cool tool that brewers have these days if they just want to up that acidity a little bit, or if they're trying to like convince their friend to get into sour beer. That's a good way to do
trick
it.
Them. Yeah. I have some experience, and sour VCA in particular was one actually did get away from me and dropped the beer down to, I think it was like 2.3 or 2.5. It was that warhead flavor. When I sought advice from the folks at More Beer, the idea that he gave me was to next time mash considerably higher. I told him, I think I was at 148, and he was like, try mashing at 160 to stop basically it's the long chains breaking down. It just created that much more lactic acid. So it got away from me. I was a little sad about having to dump that batch, but I've also had successful batches with it. So these are cool because they ferment and sour in the fermenter. You skip that kettle sour step. So in my mind, I was like, hey, this is a win, but I've gone back to just kettle souring because you can control it more.
Yeah, and that's my thing. Like I said, the beers that I've had, very few, that were fermented with sour VCA and Philly sour, they were sour, but they weren't the level of tartness that I expect, I guess, from a sour beer. And my understanding, I could be wrong about this, Ryan, but my understanding is that they are just yeast strains that happen to produce lactic acid as a byproduct in the way that, brewer's yeast produces alcohol and CO2. You are not what I've heard from a lot of people, at least with these two souring yeast in particular, is I can get away with using them in my brewery without concern that I'm going to contaminate, my plastic gear, because it's just yeast. And so I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, with the right cleaning protocols in place, if you're taking care of your gear using PBW, Star San, and I even replace lines every 6 months. I'm not concerned about that anymore. That used to be a really big hang up for home brewers, like, I have to have a whole separate set of gear. Now, for mixed fermentations, I think that is still important, but when we're talking about quick sours or kettle sours, it's just not something I'm afraid of. I believe that whatever is coming that's making that acidity, it dies off after the alcohol level reaches a certain level, and that's how it works. So it's just not a concern that I have anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. And usually when we're talking about quick sours in general, you're doing it pre-boil. And so, you're doing it in a souring in your kettle. I mean, that's the reason it's called a kettle sour, and then heating that kettle up. So I'm not terribly concerned with future contamination when it comes to these approaches either. One more note though I wanted to mention is that Brettanomyces does tend to reduce the pH a little bit more than Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but it's not to the point where, again, like you're going to get a super tart character, but it can contribute that nice little zesty bite. Usually Brett is being used with other, microbes as well. And so you're just using it more for its character. The funky character contributes rather than the souring characteristic. So the main way that we get tartness, that we get low acidity in beer, or I guess I should say high acidity, low pH in beer, is through the use of bacteria. And the two most common bacteria that we use for souring beer, one is Pediococcus. This is the lesser common of the two, which is common in traditionally soured beer. It takes a lot longer to do its thing. And what people will say is that it creates a complex acidity. It is a lactic acidity, my understanding is. There is some risk of off flavor development when you're using a bacteria like Pediococcus, which is in a lot of the classic, Flanders Red lab blends, stuff like that. People have talked about like a snotty or a ropiness that they get when they're doing like a long fermented sour beer, traditionally soured beer. I have experienced this. That is a function of Pediococcus. So that is one thing that can happen. It does not ruin your beer. Eventually, my understanding is the microbes ultimately end up metabolizing and reducing that kind of sliminess over time anyway. So it's not a bad sign. It's just a function. Like I said, it's just something that can happen when you're souring with Pediococcus. Have you used Pedio before in like a traditionally soured beer?
I have. I've also done, I guess, tasting panels where they were blending different sour beers. I have experienced that ropiness in my own, and when I saw that pellicle, I freaked out. So you get online and immediately everybody's calling it a sick beer. It's like, no, that's so basically that's the production of exopolysaccharides, basically. So it's like it's making those chains. It kind of looks like it can make snotty little like filaments in the beer. For long mixed sours, mine went away after about 3 months. I opened a bottle and I was like, hey, it's all gone. It cleared up. But I did get kind of some diacetyl out of those. And so I assume that over time, 6 months, a year, however long, if you're willing to wait that long, that should clear itself up as well. But it's definitely not a quick process.
No, and that's the thing. I've never had for a beer that was soured just with Pediococcus, at least that I'm aware of. It's usually
you mix it.
Right. It's part of a blend, and and I'm thinking like the Roeselare from Y Yeast is a common one. I think Sour Batch Kids might even have some Pedio in it. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it's a common bacteria that's included in these traditional sour yeast blends, which is great. Yeast and bacteria blends. But the primary souring bacteria that we are all familiar with, we know it from food products, whether it's kimchi or yogurt, we know it from souring beer as well, is lactobacillus. And this is what is known to create that really nice, clean acidity. It's even kind of, I hear brewers these days referring to the characteristic that lactobacillus contributes as a lactic tartness. I mean, we've come to identify it by a name even. Because it's so common, right? It is that just nice, clean, zippy tartness that you get when you use lactic acid bacteria. These are bacteria that produce lactobacillus. And yeah, I think it's awesome. And this is really what the main focus is on when it comes to kettle souring.
Yeah, and again, we can say for all of the people out there saying this isn't a real sour beer. We're not apples to apples with traditionally mixed fermentation beers. This is its own thing, and I do like that lactic tartness. That's what I'm after these days, especially because of how easy it is to use it.
Well, and that's the key, right? When I made those two traditionally soured, and I've done more than two, but when I made my first two traditionally soured beers, 14 months in, I'm sampling these things and going, man, are these ever going to drop, to the tartness that I want them to? And it just took forever. And they had the pellicles and it looked cool, and I had them in glass carboys. And, I get to 18 months and I'm bottling these things up and I'm saving those for a couple, 2 or 3 years. I think I still have 2 bottles left even. And, they're good. They're good. But the fact that I can make a beer that I like better than that, that's sour in 2 weeks versus 2
Right.
years, that is what I'm after. And so I understand the argument that traditionalists want to make that you're not going to get as much complexity. Okay, I appreciate your opinion. I actually don't disagree with you, but that doesn't make doing kettle souring bad. And so again, just to kind of reshift our focus, Lactobacillus is the primary bacteria, souring bacteria that we are looking for when it comes to making these quick sours. And there are, Ryan, what are there, like 15 strains of Lactobacillus out there, something like that?
At least 44 that are listed on Wikipedia as of this morning. Yeah.
Yes, it's going to change tomorrow, I'm sure. But I was referring more to, like, I think there's like 12 or 15 that have been, like, you can use it in the production of beer. But the two most common ones, at least that I'm aware of, are Lactobacillus brevis and Lactobacillus delbrueckii. And you'll see that, I mean, I think most labs have like isolated pure cultures of both of those, and they are intended to be used in conjunction with other stuff, whether that's Saccharomyces cerevisiae or Brettanomyces, whatever it might be. But those, and maybe your experience is different, those are the two that I tend to hear talked about the most when it comes to kettle souring.
Yep, that's exactly right. And like you, I do not consider myself an expert on this. So the folks at Milk the Funk, there's tons of information out there. So if you really want to get into the nerdy side of which strains these are, go do a little bit of research and you'll find yourself in a deep rabbit hole really quick.
Yeah. Our focus really, and I think most people who listen to the show understand that, is the pragmatic application of what we're doing.
Correct.
We definitely do our research. We understand what we need to understand about these things, but there's no way we're going to be able to break down the metabolic activity of Lactobacillus brevis versus Delbrueckii. But what most brewers can do, and we're going to walk through how to make a sour beer in a minute. It's not that difficult. But when you get your wort created and it's at the temperature that you want it to be, before you pitch your yeast or proceed with the normal boil, you're going to add a culture to it, a Lactobacillus culture, whether that's brevis, Delbrueckii, or a non-lab source, which we're going to get to in a minute. And you're going to let it work. You're going to let it do its thing and try to hold it at that warmer temperature over time. Some anecdotal reports, your present company included here, Ryan, I think you're with me, have come back that these lab cultures are wonderful. They just tend to take a little bit more time than some of the alternatives we're going to talk about. And that's okay. They are massively faster than a traditional sour. So I just wanted to make that distinction. It's not as immediate as some other options, but it's also much, much quicker than using your kind of typical traditional sour beer yeast and microblends.
Yeah, the non-lab sources just seem to be working better for me. And it may be a function of something else in there with that lactobacillus, but anecdotally, that's my go-to, both for the cost and the ease of use.
Yeah, well, and just how easy it is to acquire. You go to your grocery store. What are we talking about? We're talking about the probiotic drink known as Goodbelly. Now, you can find other probiotics out there that have the same stuff as Goodbelly, and they work equally as fine. I'm here to tell you right now that if you're going to go by it's usually women's probiotics. They're marketed towards women for gut health and everything else. And you can find these probiotic pills, but they're like 10 times the price as going to the store and just getting some Goodbelly yogurt shake, which is relatively cheap, right? And it's pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, it's like $4. It comes in what looks like a 1 liter milk carton. There's different flavors. I have used the Goodbelly in powder form, like it's intended to be stirred into tea or coffee or whatever. It worked, but the Goodbelly juice is my go-to.
Yeah, it's like a yogurt shake, right? It tastes delicious. I mean, I like the way it tastes.
It's pure liquid. It's just like drinking the consistency of orange juice.
Right. Yeah. I don't know why I consider that a shake, but it's not water necessarily. But
No,
yeah.
it's not water.
And it's usually flavored. The thing about Goodbelly is that it's meant for consumption, so it's flavored to taste good with fruits. But I believe they have a unflavored option. I've never used that. I used the mango Goodbelly and the berry Goodbelly in the past. But what Goodbelly contains, among many other very gut healthy, good bacteria for your body is Lactobacillus plantarum. And my understanding, again, not an expert, but my understanding is that Lactobacillus plantarum is what most people credit as being the primary souring agent in Goodbelly when you use it in place of, a lab culture.
Yep, that's exactly what my understanding is.
Yeah, and I wish I knew more about the differences between Brevis, Delbrueckii, Plantarum, all that stuff, but we don't, and that's okay. What we can do, though, is look at the impact that they have when we're making these kettle soured beers. In my experience, I've done kettle sour beers many times using various methods. I've used lab cultures, I've used blends, I've done Goodbelly, and one of the things that I've done that I actually like a lot is using unmilled grain. You use it in the same way you would a lactobacillus culture or probiotic, in that you get that wort down to the temperature that you want to hold it at, and then you add like a bag of just a handful of unmilled grain, because there's lactobacillus bacteria on the outside of those grains, and then you let it sour over about 24 to 48 hours. The reason I like that approach is it's kind of unpredictable, and to me that's fun in this day and age of highly predictable results when it comes to my brewing, and it contributes a more of a complex characteristic that I feel more closely, but not exactly, emulates a more traditional sour beer character. Now, usually I'm making low ABV Berliner Weiss using that method, so it's not like you're trying to get this traditional, Belgian sour beer anyways. But Goodbelly is a fantastic source, and in my experience, it works quite a bit faster than pretty much any other method that I've used before. Is that the case for you too? I mean, you're dropping that pH just really rapidly.
It is the unmilled grain that has worked for me. I did find that it took a lot longer to kick off its process, which always makes me a little bit nervous, because you're holding that wort at a temperature where other things can be growing as well. So in an effort to get that yeast on there to get it up to a boil to stop that souring process, Goodbelly's always been good for me.
Goodbelly's good, right? It's good for souring.
I know. I almost tripped up there. Yeah. Goodbelly's good for me.
Yeah. So here's the deal. Every time we do an episode like this, I get multiple emails from people saying, well, what's the process in general? We're going to get to the experiment you did in the next segment, but just to kind of finish the brewing process for making these kettle sour beers, once you do the souring process, so we walked through that earlier, you've pitched your Goodbelly, you've pitched your lab culture, whatever it is, it gets to the point where you like the acidity. It might take 2 days, it might take 3 days, something like that, but it gets to that point. Then all you have to do is heat that kettle up, proceed with your boil like normal. Some people do like a 10-minute boil and just add a couple of hop pellets, just because you don't need the hops in these sour beers usually. But if you're making a hoppy sour, you're going to hop it like usual. And then you proceed with your regular brewing process. You're going to chill that wort, pitch your regular ale yeast or lager yeast, whatever you're using, and proceed like usual and let it ferment. And now what you've done is you've let the lactic acid bacteria create this lactic acid in that wort. And then now that that's there, you just proceed like a normal brew day. It's very, very easy. It's nowhere near as scary as I think a lot of people might think it is. And really, you can come up with some amazingly unique styles of beer that you've probably never tasted before. The world is your oyster. You can try this with anything. I've had kettle soured stouts before that just blew my mind. So it's a really, really neat process. Yeah, it's really fun. And in fact, I had a friend who made a kettle soured blueberry stout that sounded awful, and this beer was phenomenal, and that's the beauty of homebrewing. You can experiment with these types of things. So if memory serves, I've used Goodbelly, I think, twice in my day. One was mango, one was the berry one, but I was floored with the results. It was absolutely awesome. What I loved most was how quick the pH of the wort dropped. I think it was like 2.8 pH after barely a full day of doing its thing. So I definitely preferred that beer to ones that I've made using more traditional approaches. That's not to say I haven't loved other traditionally soured beers. Well, Ryan, you were curious how a beer soured with Goodbelly would compare to one soured with a lab culture, and designed an experiment to test it out. Results from that when we're back from this break. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling wort can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love traditionally soured beers. I think I've made my point on that already. And on some level, I can understand the argument from the sour beer purists out there who contend that such methods produce more complexity. Then again, complex doesn't always mean better, at least in my opinion. And I found that these quick turnaround kettle sours can be equally as enjoyable. Ryan, you also enjoy good quick sour beers and recently performed an experiment comparing souring with either Goodbelly Probiotic drink or a lab culture of Lacto Brevis.
That's right. I was curious to see how Lacto Brevis works. I'm a huge fan of Imperial, so it only made sense to do an experiment for it. So for this one, I was going to do one big batch, as we normally would for pitching the variable after the boil. But for this one, I went with 2 5-gallon batches of blonde ale. Or, you know, since it's going to be soured, it's going to be a straight sour recipe.
Yeah.
It was 73% Pilsner malt, 18% wheat malt, and 9% of acidulated malt. So the brewing process is, for the mash, is exactly like a regular beer, just mashed at 150 Fahrenheit or 66 Celsius for 60 minutes. I do recirculate the mash in the clawhammer kettles. It's super easy. So when the mash was complete, I removed the grains and I did bring the kettles up to a boil for 5 minutes just to kill anything off that might be in there that would otherwise take over during the souring phase.
Yeah, so that's like I mentioned earlier. One of my favorite ways to make a quick sour is through using grains. So, arguably, I mean, there used to be this method that people would do. I don't think they're doing it very much anymore, though. My understanding is that Blue Owl out of Austin, Texas, they rely purely on what's called sour mashing or souring in the mash. It's pretty basic. The idea there is that you're gonna mash and then you let that mash naturally fall. This is the way I was told it's done to the temperature, that souring temperature, and then whatever lab or lactic acid bacteria is still present in the mash from the grain will go to work, sour that, and then you run off like usual and proceed like normal. The reason we want to do this, bring it up to a boil before we pitch our lactic acid bacteria, is to avoid anything else. We want full control. We're adding the souring agents ourselves, and we want those to do the work. So that's why you do that brief boil, is just to kill off anything else that might be in there.
Yep, and I'm slightly paranoid when it comes to stuff like that, so pasteurizing it just makes me feel better.
Yeah, me too.
So one note at that, I have made the mistake of adding just, I believe it was like half an ounce of bittering hops. I added it at that boil, just thinking I was going to, save a step. Well, guess what? It never soured because the lactobacillus is extremely sensitive to hops. We're talking even a hop pellet that's stuck like near your element could make this entire thing a non-starter. So perfect cleanliness. Do not add hops at this point. You're going to add those later if you're adding them at all.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. That is the ubiquitous recommendation is do not pre-hop sour your wort before you hop it. Fine.
Yeah.
I made that mistake as well. In fact, it's on the website. I made a Berliner Weiss where I was drinking with friends that, they're over there hanging out and we're making this beer. And I threw in some hops during the first time. And I thought, crap, I think it was like 3 pellets in a 5.5 gallon batch.
Force a habit. Yeah.
Yeah. Force a habit. Well, it soured up just fine, but I used grains for it. So I do wonder if whatever lactobacillus bacteria is on those grains is just one that's maybe a little bit less sensitive to those alpha acids, to that bitterness. But regardless, I know the recommendation though is just don't hop your wort until it's soured. You don't need to. So.
Yep. So the next step after the boil is complete. So again, we're talking a short boil, 5 minutes. You're not trying to boil off or do anything else. You're just trying to pasteurize it. So I boiled it for 5 minutes, then chilled my wort with immersion chillers down to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35°C, before pitching my lacto strains. So one kettle got the Goodbelly and one got the Lacto Brevis. I did cover the kettles and I set the temperature controllers to 95 and I wrap the top with saran wrap. I know it gets contentious when people hear that I don't CO2 blanket. I just don't think it's that important. I have tested it one way and the other. It just feels like an extra step. And I personally have not seen any effect from coating it with CO2, but
well, I'll tell you this: we've actually done an experiment where we did the CO2 blanket versus no cover or anything like that, not worrying about it. And I believe that we'll save that for its own episode. But Cliff's Notes version, I believe the uncovered one did produce more like sulfur smells and just not real good aromas during the souring and fermentation process. But in the end, they were indistinguishable, if I recall correctly. I understand the concern. I'm with you. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm like you. When I'm making a kettle sour, I do wrap the edge of the lid with saran wrap. But my concern there is that little bugs don't get in. I don't want
exactly.
like a fruit fly getting in there and adding, making it vinegar as opposed to this nice sour beer that I want. So the beautiful thing also, I'm so glad with where we're at these days with electric brewing and being able to plug in and set a temperature, to maintain a very specific temperature, because it makes doing this so easy. You just set it at 95F and walk away. And for us in the summertime, when it's already 95 in our garages anyways, you're not really relying on too much more energy, right?
And the range, I mean, we picked 95. I've heard it be at 90. I've heard people saying they want it at 100. It's a pretty wide range there, and maybe that'll change the actual character of the final product. But for these, I picked 95.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. That's what I've always done, is 95 as well, and it does work really, really well. Now, we chose Imperial Yeast W25 Lacto Brevis specifically because it is a clean culture, and I can't find a pure Lactobacillus plantarum strain anywhere. Maybe it's out now, but back then it wasn't. So we went with Lacto Brevis. So, disclaimer: if there's a noticeable difference between these beers, it could be because of the souring of either of these, but really it may very well be just because of that lactobacillus strain, and they produce something. That is a function of the variable that we were interested in finding out. So,
yep. So for this one, I chose the raspberry blackberry Goodbelly. I have used the mango one as well. I don't think that it imparts flavor in the final beer. It's just not enough to impart that flavor. So whichever one you pick, or there's a non-flavored version. I chose the 32 ounce, 946 milliliter carton of it, and just pitched the entire thing into that wort once it was at 95 degrees, and then a whole pouch of W25 Lacto Brevis.
Yeah, in terms of the volume that you use of the Goodbelly, I've heard it recommended to use anywhere from a couple shots of the stuff to 16 ounces. What's that? 460 or so milliliters, and you can buy them in that. But you can add the whole 32 fluid ounces as well. Like you, my experience is that the flavor of the Goodbelly has little to no impact whatsoever. I've never noticed it at all. So you can, again, pitch any amount you want. If it were me with a 32 fluid ounce carton of this stuff, I'm pitching half of it, drinking the rest myself while I'm brewing. So that's just me.
It's funny. I did pour myself a shot glass of it to drink it. It made me feel healthy.
It's so good. Yeah.
So yeah, now they're pitched. I wrap them up and leave them overnight. I went to check, I believe it was about 16 hours, and I'd gotten most of the way. And after 24 full hours, the Goodbelly, true to form, had worked marvelously, and my pH was at 2.9. So it was a little bit lower than I really wanted to go for. I usually try to stop it around that 3.0 to 3.2 range, but 2.9, I was happy. You can taste them as well, and you definitely get that tartness. You still have the sweetness from the unfermented wort. However, you can kind of get a flavor test. So even if you don't have a pH meter, which are super cheap to buy, just go get one on Amazon. If you don't have a pH meter, you can do this by taste alone. So in an effort to avoid making an enamel peeler, I brought that one up to a boil. And then chilled it and got it into the fermenter at that 24-hour mark. The lab culture kettle was still at 3.8 pH after 24 hours, which was curious to me.
Yeah. That is the thing that I've heard. This is another bit of anecdote that I've heard is those lab cultures. I don't know if it's because of the amount of lactobacillus bacteria that's actually in there, but I would think it was quite a bit. But for some reason, and maybe it's just brevis takes longer than plantarum, but for some reason they do seem to take a little bit longer. Now, another disclaimer, and this is one of those caveats I think that is a part of doing sour beer experiments. You cut off the souring and proceeded with boiling on the Goodbelly beer a full day before you did with the lab culture. And a part of the reasoning for that was we didn't want to create this acid bomb that was so obviously more acidic than the other one. Yes, that would prove something about the Goodbelly, but we had to kind of weigh our options here. And what we ultimately decided with on this one, and we might do it differently in the future, was to go ahead and proceed early with the Goodbelly batch because it was done, and then give the other batch another 24 hours. Again, we didn't want to go too much longer on the other batch because who knows what's going to happen in that time. So what we decided was let's give it 24 more hours, see where we're at with the lacto brevis batch, and then just go with it from there. And we'll call any differences, again, a function of the variable. So again, 2.9 pH after 24 hours in the Goodbelly batch versus 3.8 pH in the lab culture batch at 24 hours. After another 24 hours, that lab culture batch, it only dropped another 0.4 pH. So it was at 3.4 pH, at which point we stuck to our guns and we proceeded with chilling or boiling, chilling, and then pitching the yeast into that one, right? Now, both of these beers were hopped during the boil. It was a 1 hour boil, I understand. And so you added just 7 grams of mosaic at 10 minutes left in the boil. I like that option because it's known for having that kind of blueberry thing with it. And then you fermented both at a normal ale temperature with Imperial Yeast AO7 flagship. So starting at that point, the biggest differences are at this point is the variable, the different souring bacteria, but then also this 1 day difference. So you got to keep that in mind when we're interpreting the results.
Yeah, it was a call that we decided to make. I mean, of course, we've got the variable of like, hey, I'm leaving this wort for an extended amount of time. Who knows what else is going to take over? And so between paranoia, but also an efficiency, like I don't really want to leave my kettle out there hot for 3, 4, 5 days.
Exactly.
That would be it'll start ruining the point of making a quick sour because now you're talking about like just extended time. In a brewery setting, that would never work because you're tying up your equipment and you can't do other things with it. And so it wasn't a thing. The lab culture did seem to stall at that 3.4 pH also. So I checked it, probably every 8 hours just to see if anything was moving, and it just fluttered right there. It was like 3.3, 3.4 pH after 48 hours. So it was the right call to make. So yeah, you're right. For anybody listening that wants to try and replicate this, just know there's a 24-hour difference in the next steps. So I did ferment with a Imperial Yeast AO7 flagship. I let it go for 5 days, and then each batch was I put in 3 pounds of frozen triple berry blend. This is the same berries that I used when I make your berry hard cider recipe that I stole from the website way back when. Any berry blend would work. These just came from Walmart, I think. Costco has some, and they're good. It's my go-to for these kettle sours. I really like that flavor.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And you know, the thing is that 3 pounds really does seem to be spot on for berry flavor in a 5.5 gallon batch, just a 19-liter batch. So if you're into the berry flavor, which I absolutely am, I think that's the way to go. And what I like to do is defrost them and then kind of macerate it with my hands once it's defrosted and break some of that, you know, those cell walls up and get it like that and then dump it in. And but yeah, that's what you did. And then you let those sit for what, another week or so on the berries before taking a hydrometer measurement.
Another 5 days, took the hydrometer measurement. Both were at 1010 final gravity. I was very happy with that. After the berries are added, it kind of kicks fermentation back off too. So you'll see another bit of airlock activity. The pHs of the final beers. So I took the measurements of the final ones, and the Goodbelly was at 3.0 and the lab culture was down to 3.1, which was really curious to me. What do you think was happening there, Marshall?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea what was happening, but it's just as curious to me as it is to you. And this is something that we've observed a few times, that something about fermentation, something about, you know, obviously adding fruit, you would expect that to drop the pH a little bit. But in the Goodbelly batch, it seemed to bring the pH up a little bit, whereas the lab culture batch, it brought it down to the point where they were almost the same. I mean, 3.0 versus 3.1. That's wild.
And I mean, bringing it up from 2.9 to 3.0, that could have just been my reading for that day, or, you know, something. But the lab culture one came down to 3.1. So I was really confident that these were very similar, at least by the numbers. Again, we didn't measure the titratable acidity. That comes with some extra steps that I really didn't feel confident doing properly. So I didn't want to report anything on that, nor do I want to go through that process every time I make a kettle sour. So pH is what I relied on. They were super similar to the taste at that point. And at this point, so I was ready to cold crash them. I pressure transferred them to CO2 purged kegs, exactly like I do with any other beer. And the filled kegs were placed on gas in my walk-in and left alone for 2 weeks to slow carbonate. You can burst carbonate at this point, but I just went with the low and slow to let any of those, the berry flavor kind of mellow out and anything else to just kind of settle and be happy. So I went low and slow on this one. I do carbonate these a little bit higher than other beers, but I think that's just my preference. So
that's me too. I love a nicely carbonated sour beer. I mean, that to me is key for that refreshing component of a nice tart sour beer.
Yeah. It's something about the combination of the sourness, and then you get that zippy mouthfeel from the higher carbonation. It's fun. And these do not foam very much. They don't have a ton of head when you're pouring them out of the tap or bottle. And so I'm not worried about it being, like 3.0 volumes.
Not at all. I think that's actually ideal. Is that 2.8 to 3.0 volumes? You get that nice sparkle, you know, when you're putting it to your lips. So, so far these beers by the numbers are looking a little bit more similar than maybe we would have expected based on where they were at pre-fermentation. So, before serving these to blind tasters for evaluation, you did a round of evaluations yourself. Now, first off, let's talk about the way they look. Identical. I'm looking at the pictures right now up on my screen, and they look exactly the same. They're slight haze, which is to be expected in a sour beer that didn't take very long to make, but mostly clear, beautifully red hue with a nice light pink head. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I'm after, you know?
Those are really good to look at, and non-beer people look at that and they're like, "Oh, what is that?" And even my wife doesn't like beer, but she will drink these.
Oh yeah,
and I think the appearance has a big impact on that too.
Yeah, totally. So you did, when we do these experiments prior to going and getting our blind tasters, we do a round of typically 5 to 10 personal triangle tests just to see where we're at with it and to see our ability to distinguish them. Ryan, you did 6 triangle tests, and out of those, how many times did you get it right? Tell us about your experience with these beers.
Yeah, I've taught my kids how to blind serve these. So I mark the bottom of one cup. I do the exact same triangle test that we do on our tasters. I did 6, and I got 5 out of 6 correctly. And if I remember right, it was the last one out of 6 that I got wrong. And at that point, it could have just been taste fatigue.
Yeah, palate fatigue. Right?
I was pretty confident with these. with the difference.
Yeah, sour beer in particular, it's funny, people will comment, well, you need to have the tasters do a series, of different triangle tests. That's kind of what we're trying to avoid, is the palate fatigue. We want to serve these to them before they've had anything to drink, before they've tried the beers without knowing anything, to see if right off the bat, when they're fresh, they can distinguish them. You still got 5 out of 6 right, with it being your last one that you struggled with. That to me makes sense with a sour beer. Of the two, though, I mean, this is obviously consistent enough to at least suggest there was a meaningful difference between these beers. Of the two, which one did you prefer, and what did you notice as being different between them?
Yeah, this was interesting, and I don't know how this is happening, but I thought the Goodbelly one had a little bit more kind of a lemon zest tartness. It was very identifiable to me, and the body, it just lingered a little bit longer, while the Lacto Brevis one was thinner, and it just didn't have that lemon zest zip. Again, I'm not exactly sure what's going on in here that would cause that. And that's just my preference, was the Goodbelly. If you're after a clean and just like flow over your tongue and it goes away right away, then, I mean, choose the Lacto Brevis. That's just my preference, is for that more mouthfeel. Yeah.
And so it was still the Brevis, the Lab Culture batch was still tart, right? I mean,
yeah.
So it still had that acidity that we're after. You're just saying that, I mean, would you say, and I don't want to put words in your head here, but would you say the Goodbelly batch did have maybe a little bit more complexity in your opinion than the Brevis batch, or?
It had more character. Definitely, again, that zesty tartness is kind of the descriptor that I'm trying to use for it.
Yeah.
But it was the body that was more noticeable. The sourness, however, were the same.
Oh, that's so that to me is so fascinating, because you would expect with the numbers, post souring pre fermentation, you'd expect the Goodbelly batch to have just been noticeably more acidic than the Lab Culture batch, but that's not the case. They were, in your opinion at least, they were equally as tart. They just had a different character to it, and you liked what the Goodbelly did over the Brevis in this case. But I've had beers made with the Lacto Brevis strain from Imperial Yeast, and they're phenomenally good in my opinion.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, with Goodbelly, you're adding more than just Lactobacillus plantarum. You're getting everything else that's in there, and it makes sense that something else is also going to work and contributing, I don't know, quote, more than a pure strain of Brevis.
Because they do have basically a cocktail of, in air quotes, healthy things for gut health in there.
Right.
So something else is at play. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'll tell you this. When I went out to my brewery to fill a pint, I didn't hesitate a single moment between the two taps. I would go to either, and I enjoyed those beers equally.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, you were out of the Goodbelly one when I came over, but you still had some of the Brevis, and it was delicious. So I get it. We're kind of forcing ourselves to choose a preference. They're both awesome, and you're not going to dump either batch. So I think that in and of itself says a lot about the way these quick sours came out. Now, obviously, our opinions don't really matter. It's the blind tasters that we're after. In this case, you served these triangle tests of these beers to 31 tasters who had no idea what was going on, only that they were sour beers, because it's pretty obvious when you're drinking a sour beer. Out of 31 tasters, 16 would have to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with some level of confidence that there is a meaningful difference between these beers, which we would contend are caused by the variable that we're looking at here. And in the end, how many people actually identified the unique sample?
We had 61% of the participants find the difference. So they were distinguishable. It was a significant result.
Yeah. So out of 31 people, 19 of them, a full 19, 61% were able to identify that odd beer out. So again, that pushes us past that threshold where it starts to look like, okay, there's something meaningful going on here. There is a difference. Now, again, because of the caveats that we mentioned earlier, it could be, what I tend to believe, the difference in souring, bacteria, or what we pitched into them. It may also have been that one of them sat around for 24 hours longer than the other one, to catch up. We allowed it to catch up. But regardless, those two things together, that's still a meaningful difference that I think can inform the approach, that I'm going to take in the future as well. Now, when we do an experiment that returns a significant result, we ask my least favorite question of all, because we know how subjective preference difference is, but we ask them which beer, what of these two beers, when they don't know yet that they got it right, but we have a way of having them compare just the beers that are different, the two, no longer three. And we ask them, which one do you like more? And out of that, 11 of the 19 people who got it right said they liked the beer soured with Goodbelly more than the other. And then 6 people said they liked the beer soured with W25 Lacto Brevis. So not bad. I mean, I think my hunch is that the modern palate has gotten used to having a more acidic experience. And I know you're saying the acid was the same in both, or that tartness was pretty similar in both, but there was clearly something going on that made them different. And in this case, a majority of the people who got it right tended to like the Goodbelly. Now, one person did say they don't have a preference despite tasting a difference, and one person admitted to really not perceiving much of a difference at all.
Yeah, on this one, I was pretty happy with the mix. The tasters, most of those were from a homebrew club. So these are folks that are used to, trying to dive into beer and analyze them. So I trusted their palates. And I try to watch them when they're doing the preference thing. I don't try to put ideas or sway their vote one way or the other. But I did watch them, and almost every single person that did that preference question was like, oh, these are both good. I can't decide. And so the preference was very light. Some did mention getting an aroma difference, and that's how they were able to tell them apart. I couldn't smell that difference, but it's something that I wasn't picking up. So yeah, 11 preferred the Goodbelly, 6 preferred the Lab Culture, and 1 had no preference, and somehow one reported perceiving no difference.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're not the only one, and that's the nature of random guessing, is that people are bound to guess right. But I think in the end, what's really cool is just the overall implication here is that Goodbelly seems to be a cheap and effective way to sour work quickly, producing beers that are similar in quality to those using lab cultures. And it's a little bit cheaper. It's easier to get your hands on. And you could go out right now and I don't have a lab culture of lactobacillus. Well, I'm just going to run to the grocery store and pick some up and make a quick sour beer. I think that's pretty rad. So I don't make too many sour beers, but given my experience with Goodbelly in the past and the results of this experiment, I really don't see any reason not to use it in the future, particularly because it seems to produce the characteristics that I'm after in my quick sour beers. So, well, we've got a couple reader comments I want to get to, Ryan, just to have you respond to real quick. The first one comes from another Ryan. This Ryan is Ryan B, who says, funny timing. I've always used Omega's Lacto Blend, but I have a batch souring with Goodbelly in my kitchen as I type. $4 and easy access versus $15 for a special order through my local homebrew shop was worth the shot, and it sounds like maybe it was a good call. So far, it soured more quickly than the Omega and didn't smell like vomit. Both wins.
Yeah, a win is a win. I have personally not gotten the vomit flavor on anything, fortunately. But yeah, the Goodbelly works for me, and I'll probably continue using it. And like you said, so a couple of things here. It kind of depends on your homebrew shop too. Obviously, you can order these online, but if your homebrew shop has it sitting in their fridge for 2-3 months, like that pitch is changing over time. If it's a liquid one, there's powder form. Those are more shelf stable. But yeah, I like the idea that I know that my local Sprouts has a turnover and they maintain the expiration dates on the Goodbelly, so I can actually look and see which one is the freshest. I just pick it up and put it in my fridge until I'm ready to use it.
Yeah. And look, we are huge fans of supporting the businesses that keep homebrewing alive, keep brewing 100%. In general alive. We love Imperial Yeast. They're one of our biggest sponsors, our biggest supporters. What I would love is, is for like one of these labs, Imperial, to go and figure out exactly what it is that's doing most of the work. We know it's Plantarum, but any of those other little things in there that make souring with Goodbelly so much quicker and effective and good, and then package that up so that we have a pure version of that doesn't have flavorants in it, and where I feel more comfortable saying, hey, I'm gonna drop $10 as opposed to $3, on this stuff, because it is supporting the yeast manufacturer and keeping this industry going. But the fact that you can run to Save Mart or Safeway or whatever your local, Heb, I think it's just so rad that we have that ability to do that. It makes me think back to the days where it's like, oh man, I want to brew a batch, but the homebrew shop is closed, and I just don't have access to all that. Well, no, you just just run up to the store real quick. You can do it out of a extract batch even. I think it's super cool. So Ryan, I'd love to hear back how that beer turned out, and if you've done a comparison with the lab culture as well. So final reader comment comes from Dan, who says, can you detail how you accomplished the souring phase? How did you minimize O2 exposure and maintain the temp of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 35 C? Before you answer that, Ryan, I want to reiterate something I kind of touched on earlier, which is that there's a lot of concern as to the negative impact oxygen exposure has during the souring phase. I'm not entirely sure that that's backed up by really hard evidence. I do think that there's something that occurs. We've smelled this before when oxygen is exposed during the souring process with lactic acid bacteria. So if you want to avoid it, you can. But I've done covered the top of my wort that's souring with saran wrap and then covered it with a lid and done all that. And I've done it other ways as well. It doesn't seem in the end to have much of an impact. So I wanted to get that piece out there before you answered if you even minimized O2 exposure. I know you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Same as you. At the homebrew level, that's what we're talking about. I don't think that it makes a big difference. So I did... I covered the lid. Oh, yeah, the souring phase. So during the souring phase, I do take readings. I have a sample port on the front of the kettle, which is super handy because I can just take the shot glass, fill it with that to check my pHs as they go. So that's kind of how I'm monitoring the souring of it. And it's maintaining 95 the whole time because I set that clawhammer supply temperature controller there. It would work exactly the same with any of the all-in-ones that either have a heating element or a controller. So you've got the Bruzilla, like any of those systems, you're just going to tell it, this is the temperature that I want to stay at. Or if you have a consistent temperature in your garage, just feel comfortable leaving it on your workbench at that temperature. I would put some kind of temperature probe on there to make sure that it is within my range and not swaying too much. But don't overthink that part. Just keep track of that pH, and that's kind of your gauge of when to go up to a boil. Yeah,
I will say that souring in anything other than a electric kettle, this quick souring at least, can be kind of tricky. I didn't try it until I had electric. One thing that you can do, I have a buddy who did this, is if you're using, say, a converted cooler mash tun like a lot of us used to use for batch sparge, that'll hold the temperature pretty well. And a little trick that I've heard, it's not going to hold it perfectly, but if you started at 110, and you've got just the wort in there, so you've removed the grains, maybe you have it in a grain bag or something, you keep that wort in there and you don't boil it, or you boil it and then add it back to your cooler mash tun that you sanitize. I mean, it's a lot of work, but if you put it in there, it will hold it fairly well. And if you pitch your lactic acid bacteria at 110 Fahrenheit, which I think is like 38 or 39 C, you pitch it up there, and then overnight it's going to reduce down. And then what you can do is throw like a heat stick or something in there to keep it at that night between 95 and 110. That shouldn't be hot enough to kill off that bacteria. I've heard that people have had some decent results with that, but again, it's just so much easier if you can set it and forget it, which, sorry, Ron Popeil, to keep your kettle like that. And I know a lot of people don't have access to electric kettles, and you're using propane and other things like that. So it can be more difficult, but for us, having gone the electric route, you literally just type it into your controller and walk away and then pull it off when it's where you want it to be.
Yeah, another option I've seen people do is with a sous vide, and that helps keep that temperature up. So it's just recirculating that. It's the same thing as a heat stick. Even with propane, if you wanted to go back out there and reheat your kettle, every 4 or 5 hours, that's a pretty big volume of liquid, and it's going to hold temperature pretty well, especially if you have an insulated kettle. So it's not impossible. I'd also think that that souring is probably going to continue. It'll just be at a slower rate. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that's the kind of the theory, not the theory, the way a traditional sour is soured. It's why it takes so long though. If you have it down at 65 to 68 degrees around that 20 C mark, it's going to take a lot longer because we know that microbes work faster in warmer environments that aren't too warm, of course. So, but yeah, the avoidance of O2, I do it if you're concerned. I don't think you're going to notice much of a difference if you fail to pay too much attention to it. So thank you for the comment, Dan and Ryan. That is all the time we've got on using Goodbelly to make these quick turnaround, deliciously sour beers. Do you have any final words before we wrap this one up, Ryan?
I love the experimentation of these, and so I encourage everybody to go out and try it. Try different ways of doing it. Do the quick sour yeast blends, the Goodbelly, use lab cultures, whatever it is. Just go try them and see which version you like, and let us know.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. They're so easy and fun to make if you have the gear to do it. And, every once in a while when we do one of these episodes, I'm inspired. Something jingles in my head and I'm like, man, I'm surprised we haven't thought to do this before. What I would love to see in the future is 2 beers that are soured both with Goodbelly, but one held at like 110 Fahrenheit and the other at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and see if that souring temperature has some impact on the perceptible characteristics of beer. Who knows? Either way, don't forget to check out the Brew Lab, where Cade Job takes you into the lab with brewing experts to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.